but they still have hopes of a hopeful future, and they don't want to give up no matter what. And it kills me because these people, they aren't nobodies, as they describe themselves.
Country music has never faced a storm like this, and it all began with a man who never wanted the spotlight. Oliver Anthony came out of nowhere, lit up the charts, then turned around to expose the very system that made him a star. Now Nashville's biggest names are furious, fans are divided, and the industry is holding its breath. Whispers say he uncovered something they never wanted the world to see, and the deeper you dig, the darker it becomes. Oliver's controversial reputation. Oliver Anthony is one of those names that seems to divide a room the moment it's mentioned. Some call him the voice America's been waiting for. Others say he's the industry's biggest headache, and somehow, both are true. In less than a year, he's gone from complete obscurity to one of the most talked-about figures in modern country music, not because of a massive label deal or flashy PR campaign, but because of how brutally honest he's been about everything the industry doesn't want people to talk about. His words have shaken the comfort of polished executives and resonated with millions of working-class listeners who feel like they've finally been heard. But Oliver Anthony isn't even his real name. He was born Christopher Anthony Lunsford, a kid from Farmville, Virginia, who adopted his stage name as a tribute to his grandfather and the roots of 1930s Appalachia. That decision alone said a lot about who he was. Someone deeply tied to the kind of America that rarely gets spotlighted. His life changed when he released Rich Men North of Richmond. It exploded overnight, climbing to the top of the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first artist in history to debut at #1 with no prior chart history at all. No record label, no management team, no slick marketing. Just a man, a guitar, and a voice that sounded like truth. It was raw, unpolished, and absolutely nothing like what country radio usually plays, and that was exactly why it caught fire. Almost immediately, political groups began claiming him as their own. Conservatives praised the song as an anthem for the forgotten working man, while critics accused it of being political propaganda. But Oliver Anthony shut all of that down. He told fans flat out that his music wasn't about politics or sides. He said he was writing about people, not parties. This honesty and refusal to fit into anyone's narrative made him even more unpredictable in the public eye. To the industry, he became a disruptor. To the fans, he was a folk hero. And to the people running country music, he became a question mark they couldn't quite figure out. Here was a man with a massive audience, a viral hit, and a potential fortune waiting for him, but he didn't want it. Record labels lined up with offers, tour promoters dangled millions in front of him, and he said no. He didn't want to be told what to say, how to sound, or where to show up. But it wasn't just stubbornness. Oliver Anthony had lived the kind of life that made him allergic to pretense. He dropped out of high school at 17, later earned his GED, and spent his 20s bouncing through factory jobs across North Carolina. He worked in paper mills and manufacturing plants and saw firsthand the toll of burnout, addiction, and hopelessness that haunted so many people doing honest labor. In 2013, while working at one of those plants, he suffered a skull fracture that forced him to slow down. This became the turning point that pushed him back to Virginia, closer to the land and community that shaped him. From 2014 to 2023, he worked in outside sales for industrial manufacturing. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave him the chance to talk to thousands of blue-collar workers across the state. He listened to their stories about debt, exhaustion, broken marriages, and disappearing hope. All of that would eventually become the soul of his music. Even after fame hit, his lifestyle barely changed. He lives on a $97,500 plot of farmland in Virginia in a 27-foot camper covered by a tarp roof. He bought the camper for $750 off Craigslist and still owed $60,000 on the land as of 2023. When journalists first heard that, they couldn't believe it. How could the man behind a #1 song still be living like that? But that's the thing about Oliver Anthony. None of it was ever about money. He said in interviews that he wanted to stay grounded because the more comfortable people get, the easier it is to forget what life feels like for those who don't have much. But behind this independence is a tension the industry couldn't ignore. Some insiders have described him as unmanageable. Some even whispered that he was difficult. But what they really meant was that he couldn't be shaped into the image they wanted. And as his fame grew, so did the pressure and personal battles. Oliver's personal struggles. For all the headlines and viral fame, few people realized how close Oliver Anthony came to losing everything long before his breakthrough. Behind that fiery voice and defiant independence was a man barely hanging on. He's been open about the darkness he faced, the years spent battling depression, drinking just to quiet the noise, and trying to make sense of a life that never seemed to ease up. For 5 long years, alcohol became both a comfort and a curse. He said he used to come home from work, sit in his truck, and drink until the world blurred out. There were days when he didn't want to get up at all, when music was the only thing keeping him from giving up completely. He once said on social media, "There's nothing special about me. I'm not a good musician. I'm not a very good person. I've spent the last 5 years struggling with mental health and using alcohol to drown it. I am sad to see the world in the state it's in, with everyone fighting with each other. I have spent many nights feeling hopeless that the greatest country on earth is quickly fading away." But in July 2023, something changed. Oliver said that one night, after another hard day and another empty bottle, he made a promise to God that if he could get sober, he'd devote himself fully to the purpose he was meant for. Weeks later, rich men north of Richmond took off like wildfire. It wasn't some neatly timed marketing story. It actually felt like fate catching him at the edge of collapse and giving him a reason to stand back up. That's part of what made his success so powerful. It was redemption. But sobriety didn't make his life easier. In fact, fame brought new chaos, and his private life began to unravel in ways that were just as raw as the lyrics he sang. His marriage fell apart not long after the world discovered him. According to reports, his ex-wife demanded a share of his future earnings, sparking a painful and very public legal battle that left him emotionally wrecked. He channeled that heartbreak into a song called "Scornful Woman," which many fans immediately recognized as a reflection of his divorce. This song was angry, wounded, and brutally honest, the kind that doesn't sound like it's written for radio but like a man trying to sing his way through grief. Even outside his personal life, trouble seemed to follow him. For a brief time, he signed with a management company that many fans thought would finally help him navigate fame on his own terms. Instead, it turned into another struggle. The team reportedly clashed with his creative direction, delaying projects and pushing ideas that didn't feel true to who he was. In a rant, he said, "It took 6 or 8 or 10 months of me getting stalled and manipulated and put down and discouraged to say the things I wanted to say, to the point where now I'm just back to doing my own thing again. I don't need a bunch of nerds and coffee-drinking freaks in Nashville to tell me how to live my life. I guess that was my mistake for relying on those people instead of relying on God and the people I trust." Oliver Anthony has also made headlines several times for things that were quite controversial. He once took a photo standing next to Kurt Webster, a once powerful publicist who had been disgraced after serious misconduct allegations. The picture spread across social media instantly, and people began questioning why he was associating with someone so controversial. Anthony never issued a formal statement, but the backlash added another layer to his already complicated reputation. It didn't stop there. As his songs gained more attention, critics began digging deeper into his lyrics, accusing him of fat phobia and of including subtle right-wing dog whistles in rich men north of Richmond. Those claims fueled a whole new round of debate, forcing Anthony once again to defend his intent. He said his songs weren't about shaming anyone or pushing an agenda. They were about frustration, poverty, and a system that didn't care about people like him. But the internet rarely waits for explanations, and the noise around his name only grew louder. Still, Oliver didn't hold his tongue. He's always been blunt, sometimes to his own detriment. When Beyoncé released Cowboy Carter, her country-inspired album that was celebrated for breaking genre boundaries, Anthony called it complete trash, a word that sent fans of both artists into a frenzy. He said, "One of the guys I worked with wanted me to make a post about Beyoncé's country album, about how it was good, even though it was complete trash. It just makes me want to throw up trying to listen to the beginning of her version of Jolene. It's total cringe. It represents how degenerative our society has become that a Beyoncé version of Jolene can come out and anybody actually listen to it and not think it's complete trash. Some fans claimed his statement went too far and that it was proof that he was a purist who didn't want outsiders redefining country music. However, others said it was just him being brutally honest in a world where most artists play it safe. Either way, it showed that he wasn't afraid to say exactly what he thought, even if it cost him. But while some people see a man who can't stay out of controversy, others see someone who's simply too honest for an industry that thrives on politeness. And that honesty is what eventually pushed him to speak out, not just about himself, but about the machine behind the music, why he avoids the spotlight. For most artists, success is a ladder. Every viral hit, every packed show, and every headline is another step toward something bigger. But for Oliver Anthony, fame has always felt more like a trap than a reward. The same fame that changed his life also became something he had to keep at arm's length. While record executives rushed to cash in on his momentum, offering deals that most people would never dream of turning down, he walked away from all of it. Multi-million-dollar contracts were pushed across the table, promises of private jets, tour buses, and a life built on constant visibility were made, and he said no every single time. To the industry, that decision made no sense. Here was a man who could have had everything, the endorsements, the fame, and the endless tours, and yet he seemed to run the other way. But to Oliver Anthony, it made perfect sense. He didn't start making music to live under a spotlight. He started because he was trying to get through life. He said more than once that he doesn't want the excess that comes with the business, not the fleet of buses, the flashy entourages, or the fame that demands you perform every waking hour. He just wants to live simply, the same way he did before the world ever heard his name. What drives him isn't the celebrity lifestyle, it's connection. That's what sets him apart from most stars. He believes music should mean something real, not be manufactured in a studio or designed to trend online. His songs come from a place of exhaustion and honesty, and he's always been protective of that authenticity. And after years of working regular jobs, scraping by, and finding peace in small things, that kind of trade has never appealed to him. Fame brought him opportunities, but it also brought pressure. Endless calls, interviews, and people who wanted a piece of him. In his quieter moments, he's talked about how strange the whole experience feels, how suddenly everyone expects him to play a role that doesn't fit. It's not that he doesn't appreciate the fans, he just never wanted to be turned into an image, something polished and predictable. His goal has never been to fill stadiums. It's to keep his songs close to the ground, where they can still mean something to the people who need them most. He said, "I'm sitting in such a weird place in my life right now. I never wanted to be a full-time musician, much less sit at the top of the iTunes charts. Draven from Radio V and I filmed these tunes on my land with the hope that it may hit 300K views. I still don't quite believe what has gone on since we uploaded that. It's just strange to me." That's also why he's become more vocal about wanting to focus on ministry and what he calls a rural revival. It's not necessarily about preaching or building a brand, but about rebuilding community and reminding people that faith, kindness, and simplicity still matter. He spent countless hours reading messages from fans who tell him that his songs helped them stay sober, helped them feel less alone, or gave them the courage to keep going when they were ready to give up. Those messages weigh on him. They remind him that what he's doing isn't just entertainment. It's lifeblood for people who feel invisible. This sense of responsibility is also a big reason he keeps stepping away from fame when it starts to grow too loud. The bigger the spotlight gets, the harder it is to hear what really matters. And for Oliver, the quiet, the small towns, the farmland, and the people who don't have much but still keep going are where he finds meaning. He's seen enough of the machine to know what happens when artists get pulled too far into it, when the marketing becomes louder than the message, and when the truth gets lost in the noise. And it's exactly that realization that shaped his opinions about the state of country music today. His thoughts on the country music industry. When Oliver Anthony finally spoke out about the music industry, it wasn't in a press release or a glossy magazine interview. It came straight from his phone, in a raw, unfiltered video that felt more like a confession than a statement. By then, he had spent more than a year watching how the business worked from the inside, and it left him disgusted. What he saw convinced him that the country music world wasn't what it claimed to be. The heart and grit that once defined it had been replaced by something hollow. He said the system was built to create illusions that record labels and managers spend more time crafting fake personas than nurturing real talent. They mold artists into brands, polish their words, dictate their outfits, and tell them exactly when to smile. Everything becomes part of an image meant to sell, not a story meant to be felt. Oliver says most of what people see on stage isn't a musician expressing their soul. It's a product dressed up as authenticity. Oliver has always believed that country music is supposed to sound like life. But after his success, he realized how few people in Nashville still believed that. He started describing writing sessions filled with songwriters who had never lived the stories they were writing about, people sitting in studios, drinking hard seltzers, wearing comfortable shoes, and trying to guess what rural America wanted to hear next. The songs might sound perfect, but they came from nowhere real, and this was the core problem. He also noticed that the business wasn't driven by emotion or meaning anymore, but by numbers. Every decision revolved around what would sell, how fast, and how often. He said the people in charge didn't care about music itself, they cared about the cycle. Songs weren't written to move people, but to move charts. In his rant, he bluntly addressed the record labels and management, saying, "Those people look at you like you're a fuel source, like you're an oil well, and they just want to see how much oil they can get out of you. And whenever they're done with you, they just spit you out. You don't matter anymore. And the problem is that the music doesn't matter to them." And a lot of times the music ends up not even mattering to the artist because they have them singing songs and have them doing things that aren't even theirs. So there's not any heart in it. He also spoke about the way success seemed manufactured. He heard stories, and sometimes saw them, about labels quietly buying copies of their own releases just to inflate chart numbers. It was the kind of manipulation that fans never noticed, but insiders whispered about. To Oliver, it explained why certain artists always seemed to stay at the top, regardless of how people actually felt about their music. This realization hit him hard, especially because it meant that honesty alone couldn't compete in a system built on manipulation. Even when artists tried to take creative risks, he claimed management companies often got in the way. Projects were delayed, ideas dismissed, and songs rewritten to fit trends. For independent musicians like him, it was nearly impossible to move freely. He said the gatekeepers in Nashville protected their own, the same songwriters, producers, and managers cycling through the same projects. Outsiders were only welcome if they played by the rules, and he never did. The industry didn't know what to do with someone who refused to be shaped, so they quietly tried to shut him out. There was one point in his rant that stood out the most. He talked about trying to make music that honored faith, music that lifted people spiritually, not just entertained them. But that idea didn't fit inside a world obsessed with profit. Every meeting, every conversation seemed to come back to money. The focus was never on meaning, never on healing, never on something higher. It was just about how to package and sell a sound. This realization pushed him further from the center of Nashville and closer to the people who shared his values. In December 2024, he posted a video called "What I've Learned from the Music Industry So Far." It wasn't scripted or polished, just Oliver sitting in front of a camera, tired and frustrated. He talked about how the business treats artists like resources to be drained. Once an artist stops producing profit, they're discarded and replaced by the next promising name. The cycle never ends, and the music keeps losing its soul in the process. He didn't spare names either. He called out Nashville labels for building a culture that rewards obedience over originality. He said mainstream songwriters had turned the genre into a formula, with the same themes, the same phrases, and the same fake emotions, repeated endlessly until audiences stopped noticing the difference. And when he went after management companies, he accused them of controlling artists so tightly that creativity barely had room to breathe. Even other musicians weren't off limits. During one live session, Oliver accused Parker McCollum of using backing tracks on stage, something McCollum quickly denied. The claim stirred up more controversy, but it showed how fed up Oliver was with what he saw as a manufactured industry. He was emotional, maybe even angry, but it came from a place of frustration rather than malice. His tone in that video was a mix of heartbreak and conviction. You could hear it in the pauses between his words, the exhaustion in his voice. It wasn't the bitterness of someone who wanted revenge. It was the disappointment of someone who loved music too much to watch it be stripped of meaning. Oliver's message wasn't just about country music. It was about what happens when art becomes a business first and a form of expression second. He wanted people to remember that real music doesn't come from committee meetings or data charts, but from life. When the video ended, it left fans cheering and insiders fuming. But one thing was clear. He had broken one of Nashville's unspoken rules: never bite the hand that feeds you. And as soon as he did, the response from the industry began to unfold. Industry backlash and response. Oliver Anthony's viral rant rippled through the industry like a lightning strike. One of those moments that forces everyone to pick a side. To independent fans, he was saying what they'd all been thinking for years. But to the industry, he was biting the hand that had just started to feed him. And before long, the tension between the two worlds erupted into full view. One of the first major artists to respond was Kip Moore, a veteran country singer known for his straightforward attitude. During a backstage interview, Moore dismissed Anthony's comments as a clown show, calling them naive and out of touch. He said that criticizing Nashville's writers without understanding their work was unfair, especially when the city had produced some of the greatest storytellers in the genre's history. Moore defended writers like Casey Beathard and Brett James, names that have shaped the sound of modern country music, and argued that not every hit song was a soulless, factory-made product. His message was clear. Nashville might have its flaws, but it wasn't the villain Anthony made it out to be. That reaction captured the divide that had been building ever since Anthony first rose to fame. On one side were the mainstream artists and executives who felt attacked by his words, people who had spent decades inside the system and didn't appreciate being told it was broken. On the other were the fans and independent musicians who had lived outside of it for just as long, nodding along as Anthony finally said what they'd always suspected. Inside Nashville, opinions split fast. Some insiders quietly admitted that he wasn't wrong. They'd seen how formulaic the music had become, with the same themes, the same sound, and the same writers cycling through every major project. Even those who disagreed with his tone couldn't deny that the industry had fallen into repetition. There were conversations happening behind closed doors that rarely happened in public about whether the business had gotten too safe and too predictable. Oliver Anthony had forced those talks into the open, but others quickly shut him down, saying he'd only been in the spotlight for a year and that he hadn't paid his dues or learned what it takes to keep the machine running. They called him idealistic, maybe even reckless, a guy who stumbled into success and mistook one song's impact for a revolution. They said his criticism was like yelling from the outside without realizing how complex the inside really is. As the debate intensified, Oliver didn't back down. Instead, he became more vocal about what he wanted to do next, and it didn't include staying in Nashville. He said the industry had no place for the kind of music he wanted to make. Rather than fight a system that wouldn't change, he planned to step away entirely. His focus would shift toward faith and what he called a rural revival. He talked about traveling through small towns, holding gatherings that felt more like ministry than concerts. He wanted people to sing together, talk about their struggles, and remember that life wasn't about fame or money. He said that kind of connection mattered more than any radio hit or award. Meanwhile, Nashville tried to move on. Some executives brushed off the controversy as another social media storm that would fade like all the rest. Others paid closer attention, recognizing that Anthony's criticism hit a nerve with audiences tired of overproduced music. A few even started to rethink how they approached artists, though most changes were surface level. A tweak in marketing, a few raw acoustic sessions, and an attempt to look more authentic without actually being it. In the months that followed, Anthony's absence from the spotlight became louder than his presence had ever been. He wasn't showing up at award shows, wasn't chasing the next viral moment, and wasn't trying to repair his relationship with the industry. He stayed on his farmland, focused on his family, faith, and music that spoke to something deeper than fame. But fans kept sending him letters and messages, telling him that his songs still gave them hope. And whether Nashville wanted to admit it or not, he forced the industry to look in the mirror, to ask itself what country music really stands for and who it's supposed to speak to. Because even after all the criticism, all the backlash, and all the noise, his message still lingered, that somewhere along the way, country music lost touch with the people who built it. Do you agree with Oliver Anthony's take on the country music industry? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.